welcome everyone. Today I'm here with a special guest, Camille Biazzo, and we are going to be talking about local school wellness policies and the Triennial Assessment. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I'd like to get everyone on the same page with some general information here. Camille, can you start us off by explaining what are the school wellness requirements?
Yeah, for sure. So great place to start right at the beginning. What are the basic requirements? So as all of you probably know, student wellness is something that impacts your whole district, and it's intended to be really a district-wide initiative. But as a lot of you also probably know, those responsibilities for ensuring compliance often fall on you in the school nutrition department. So, you're probably well aware of the requirement to have this policy in place. So, and also the wellness policies are reviewed through the administrative review process. So another reason why it's really important to understand, the basic requirements of school wellness so you can avoid future potential findings in that area. The local school wellness policy is also a board policy, so it's important to keep that in mind because it can take a whole team to get this updated if it's on your list of things to do this year. And then some overall requirements for the wellness policy. Number one, do you have a policy? So that's the first thing to check off your list. Do you actually have a policy? And if you're looking for a place to start, or if your policy looks like really old or outdated, you can check out the CSBA Student Wellness Policy. The Alliance for a Healthier Generation also has a great model policy if you just need a starting point for those. And then you also need to make sure that your policy is posted publicly on your website and at each school. So ideally, like in the cafeteria is a good place to post that policy. And then a reminder, it's also important to update your wellness policy anytime the federal regulations change. So once again, if you're like pulling out a dusty old policy that hasn't been touched since 2019, the non-discrimination statement actually changed since then. So a little tip, maybe double check that you're using the most updated non-discrimination statement. The next sort of just like general reminder about school wellness, you'll want to make sure to host at least one wellness committee meeting per year. So that means you also need to have a wellness committee. And as part of that, make sure you invite all those relevant stakeholders, or that that they're permitted, that they know that they're permitted to join those meetings and be involved in school wellness. So by stakeholders, I mean anybody from like local health professionals, board members, teachers, students, parents, general public, you all, food service staff. Make sure everyone knows that they're invited to participate in that process. And another tip coming from, like a previous reviewer, you'll want to make sure that you save that agenda and that sign-in sheet from those meetings, or just one meeting if you just end up having one, as those items are requested during your administrative review. So keep that agenda, keep the sign-in sheet, keep the invitation, and we also have templates of all of those in LunchAssist Pro if you need a starting point for those. And then the last thing on the list, completing that triennial assessment. You have to do that once every 3 years, like the word triennial means 3, and then you want to post that publicly, online so everyone can see it.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks for that overview of the general wellness requirements. But can we go back to that policy piece? You mentioned there are some specific things that need to be included in the wellness policy. What exactly would I need to include in a local school wellness policy?
Yeah. So first of all, it has to be a written document, a living document that helps guide your district's efforts to create a health promoting school environment. And then, of course, because we work in school nutrition, there are some specific items that always need to be in that policy. So 8 items to be exact. And then keep in mind also that you see these 8 federal requirements right here. These aren't the only things that you can include in your policy. It can be a lot more comprehensive than this. These are more just like those minimum requirements for compliance. And then if you need help remembering all of these different requirements, because there are 8, and we haven't even gotten to the triennial assessment requirements, we do have a handy resource that summarizes each of these steps that we're going to cover today. So let's get into those different federal requirements that you need in the wellness policy. So number 1, you need to have a designated official. So the policy itself really should outline who that lead person is at the school. that's responsible for ensuring that the school complies with everything in the wellness policy. Like I mentioned earlier, it often falls on the school nutrition director, not always. If you're not sure who it is, maybe pull out that policy and see who it says. Maybe it's you. So it's important to just double check on that and make sure it's listed in the policy. The second item that you want to make sure is in your school nutrition wellness policy is that you make a note that all stakeholders have to be invited to participate in the development. So not everyone needs to show up. You just need to make sure that all those different categories of stakeholders that I mentioned are invited and are permitted to join. So parents, students, PE teachers, administrators, general public, health professionals, board members, that they're all permitted to be a part of the school wellness process. The third piece that needs to be included in your local school wellness policy are specific goals in particular areas. So you see them right here. You need to create goals for nutrition education, nutrition promotion, and physical activity. Sometimes when I was a reviewer, I would see policies that said like, we will create goals. So your policy, it's great, like that you're going to plan to create goals, but like we want to see actual goals in that policy. And then moving on to the fourth piece that needs to be included in your wellness policy are policies for foods and beverages that are sold during the school day. So all of those items that are sold to students, they need to meet those smart snacks in schools requirements. Keep in mind, like school day, that's considered like midnight until 30 minutes after the bell or after the end of the school day. Anything within that realm that's sold to students needs to meet those smart snacks in schools requirements. So another kind of like side piece to this is depending on the state you live, you might have additional, more restrictive requirements related to competitive foods. So like California, you have the competitive foods in schools rules. If you're from outside of California, you might have additional rules that you need to comply with for foods and beverages sold to students during the day.
Oh, good to know. And speaking of snacks, what about foods that are given away to students during the day? You know, foods outside of the meal program that aren't sold, like classroom parties or snacks brought by parents.
Yeah, so that brings us to the fifth requirement. So even foods that aren't sold to your students, those also need to have guidelines written in the policy. So it's up to you as a district what those foods will be allowed to be. So like classroom parties, classroom snacks, what does your district allow to be given to those students outside of being sold? So sometimes people just align those with the smart snacks rules. That's easy, then everyone is on the same page, but really it's up to you as a district for what foods are given to students during those events. And then that kind of leads into our sixth requirement, which is marketing. So any food that's like marketed across your district, those even need to meet those smart snacks in schools rules. So, you know, if you have vending machines, I remember when I'd go on review, like when this was first being implemented, sometimes I'd see like a big vending machine with like, I don't know, like Pepsi products or something, and like your school can't sell like regular Pepsi, right? And so making sure that the vending machine says water or something like that. Or if you have like digital signage that's only advertising those foods that fall under those smart snacks regulations. So yeah, that's basically everything that's included with marketing. And then the last two items, they kind of go together, and we're going to dig into them a little bit further as well. But triennial assessment, so this is something that has to be completed once every 3 years, and this is evaluating your policy itself and then the implementation of the policy, like how you're doing with meeting your goals that are listed in that policy. And then the very last thing kind of goes along with that, just making sure that your policy itself is available to the public. Typically, I see that just having it posted on your school website, and then making sure that you have the policy at every school site. Posting it in the cafeteria, like I mentioned earlier, is a good spot for it. And then also posting that triennial assessment publicly. So everyone knows what's going on with school nutrition in your community in the wellness realm.
Yeah, and it sounds, a lot goes into the local school wellness policy, but I'm glad we sort of have an 8-step checklist to keep in mind. But I do want to know a little bit more about this triennial assessment piece. It sounds like a big project. What is the triennial assessment?
Yeah, so the Triennial Assessment, school districts, you have to complete this once every 3 years at a minimum. And the assessment has, of course, some required components. So just like our wellness policy itself has required components, the triennial assessment also has, but only 4 instead of 8. So it's a little bit shorter of a list. So of those requirements, making sure you're comparing your wellness policy to a model policy. You want to make sure during that assessment, you're making sure that your policy meets those minimum federal requirements. You're going to assess progress towards reaching those goals. So you're looking both at like the policy itself, is it meeting requirements? And then like in practice, are the things you said you're going to do in the policy, are they happening across your school district? And then the final piece, you're going to evaluate overall compliance with this, and then once again, share those results with the public. So really, this is your chance to see how your policy measures up to those federal requirements, compare it to the model policy, see some insight on like what aspects of your policy or your practices need to be updated or enhanced. So, and a reminder for this whole process, it really should be more of like a group project, like you or the lead wellness coordinator, whoever it is in the district can facilitate that process, but it's really important to involve others in the overall wellness, triennial assessment process to get the most accurate feedback, especially when it comes to like figuring out what's being implemented. We know some of the answers in school nutrition, but then some things we might need to phone a friend for. So.
Okay, yeah. So these are the 4 requirements for the assessment. But could you walk me through how one would actually complete the triennial assessment? How would we go through that?
Yeah. Lucky for us, there is a tool that we can use to walk through this process. You don't have to create something yourself to do the triennial assessment. The USDA and states really leave it up to districts on how you do this process, but in our experience at LunchAssist, we've really found that the Red Center's WellSat tool is, like the most straightforward tool to assess your wellness policy and your practices. So I think the WellSat is really the best way for us, to complete that assessment. Most straightforward way, I should say.
Okay, so it's good to know that there's a tool out there to help streamline the process. But what exactly are the steps for completing the WellSat?
Yeah, so there are 4 steps that go along with the WellSat. And I think they'll be coming up on our screen in just a second. So there's the WellSat 3.0. That's like your first worksheet that you're going to work through. And then there's the WellSat-I, which is going to, we'll dig into how you complete that one. And then there's worksheet 3 and worksheet 4. So there's 4 different worksheets that you're going to complete when you're going through the wellness assessment. There they are. They're a little slow to pop up. So
sorry, having technical difficulties on my end.
No worries. Take it slow. No rush. It's a lot to take in.
So if we go back to that, there we go. There we go. So you can see on that, we just had it up. There are the 4 worksheets. So there's the WellSat 3.0, the WellSat-I, worksheet 3, worksheet 4. And then if we want to get into the WellSat 3.0 first, so that's the first step of completing this assessment. It's the most straightforward step. So you have the WellSat 3.0 worksheet, which will pop up in a second. There we go. And this is how you assess your policy. So this is where you're going to like print out your policy. You're going to print out this handy dandy score sheet, and you're going to go back and forth, and you're going to say, okay, so does my policy have goals for nutrition education? And then if it does, you're going to see on the scoring rubric right here, like 2, yes, we have strong goals. So I'm going to score that as a 2. So this is really just looking at, is your policy meeting minimum federal requirements? How does it measure up against a model policy? And that's all done through this WellSat 3.0. And then see this little icon on the slide too, that little Capitol building. That's a really important little section to look at when you're completing the 3.0, because that's a federal requirement. And so there, you're comparing to a model policy when you're filling this out. And so some of these things are like nice to have, but the federal requirements are the ones that, like, for sure you want to meet that requirement. That's the big one. And then the second piece, the second worksheet you're going to look at is the WellSAT-I. And then this is what's going on actually in practice across your district. It's similarly formatted to the WellSat 3.0, but this is where, you're actually asking people what's going on in your schools regarding school wellness across the district. So WellSat-I, WellSat interview, like I remember it like that, or WellSat-I, WellSat implementation, you're like, how is your policy being implemented when you interview people in different positions? So a tip for this section, depending on your role at the school district, like say you're the food service director, you probably know quite a few of the answers. So I would go ahead and try to answer as many questions as you can yourself on the WellSAT-I, because you know what's going on, like with the school nutrition questions, you know what's going on, probably related to like smart snacks in schools, those sections. But this tool also is asking about, remember those goals that we had to include in our wellness policy, so nutrition education, like physical activities. You might not know the answers to those questions. So that's when you like phone your curriculum director friend, find out, how many minutes of nutrition education are going on in the classrooms in order to answer those questions as part of the WellSAT-I.
Okay. So it sounds like there's two different worksheets here, but they have the same name. Can you just tell me again, what's the difference between the WellSat and the WellSat-I?
Yeah, so WellSat 3.0, so that's where you're actually just scoring your policy itself, WellSat 3.0. And then WellSat-I is you're doing the implementation or interview question. So how it's being, how those goals are actually being implemented across, all of your schools in the district. So 3.0, policy. WellSat-I, interview, talk to people. So those are the forms look pretty similar, but that's how you split them up.
But okay, now I understand. Also thinking about the I in WellSat-I as interview or implementation, that's really helpful. Okay, so what are the next steps of the triennial assessment now?
So the next steps, I feel like at least the names of the forms align a little bit better, so it's easier to remember. So your third form is step 3, worksheet 3. There's not another like WellSat name here necessarily. So when you fill out worksheet 3, this is your opportunity to find some connections, strengths, weaknesses, when you're comparing your WellSat 3.0 to your policy to your practices. So I kind of see this like kind of as like a mini gap analysis. So you see like, what are you doing really well in your policy? So if you scored some things as 2s, looking at all your 2s, your highest scores in your policy, and then you're comparing it to your implementation, so you're aligning, like where did you do really well with your policy and what are you doing really well with implementation? And so you get like a little star, you're like, yay, aligned practices and aligned policies. But there are some areas that probably aren't totally aligned, right? And so this is what you're kind of coding through this worksheet. So you have those aligned ones, and then there's other sections. So like what areas did you say you're doing something, like you have really great goals maybe written in your policy, but then you start asking around, visiting your schools, you find out like, oh, like we said we're doing all this nutrition education, but like actually no, we're not teaching any nutrition education. So we get a 2 on the WellSat 3.0, the policy, but got a 0 on the I. So we're just figuring out like where are things aligned, where are they not aligned, where are opportunities for growth, what are areas that are missing completely, like where did you score a 0 on both? So maybe you don't have any goals and nothing's happening. So this is a really great way to just like find those alignments and those gaps. And I highly recommend plugging your tools into the wellsat.org online tool. So you can like code these things by hand and categorize them. You're welcome to do that. I prefer to use the online tool because you can enter in your scores from the 3.0, then enter in your scores from the I, and then it aligns it for you. So you can just already see it organized, kind of like what you see on the screen right now. the system compares them for you. So highly recommend using the online tool. All right, we're to the final worksheet of the assessment. So worksheet 4, step 4, worksheet 4. This is where you get to just do a little writing about your findings that you saw in worksheet 3. So things are already categorized based on worksheet 3 to show you where those gaps are, where those opportunities for growth are. And then here you're just consolidating those key points basically in narrative format. And when you're looking for areas to really like focus on in this narrative, once again, I recommend circling back to those federal requirements. So if you're missing, you know, like a key federal requirement, like you don't have any goals, for example, related to nutrition education, that's what you want to make sure you note that you need to update in your policy. On the flip side, sometimes when I've been working with clients, they find out that like, oh wait, we're doing all these wonderful things, but it's not reflected in the policy. So where maybe you're doing like across the district, you're implementing a really great farm to school program, but then when you're looking at your policy, you find there's no mention of it at all. So now's your time to really, you know, create a plan through this worksheet 4 on how you're going to update the policy, maybe get credit for those extra things that weren't mentioned, like your farm to school work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to get credit where credit is due, right?
Yeah.
After completing the triennial assessment, using the WellSAT tool, is there anything else we need to do?
Yeah, okay, so you've completed all of those worksheets and all those steps. There's just like one more thing to do to kind of like wrap up your wellness assessment process. So at the very end, we always recommend that you meet with your wellness committee to go through those results, go through your action plan. You know, you're creating steps for what you need to do next. So making sure, you know, you touch base with the committee, and then making sure everything is posted publicly. So once again, the assessment plus your policy should be up on your school website, making sure that policy is available at every school site, maybe posted in the cafeteria or school office. So, and I'd like to note too, we have a resource for a sample triennial assessment report. So if you're wondering like how all those pieces can look bundled together, we have a great sample triennial assessment report that you can reference. I always like seeing examples, so it's a good place to kind of start when you're trying to wrap your mind around all of the pieces.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much, Camille. And just to do a quick recap so I can get my brain around this. For the WellSAT, which is a compliant tool you can use to complete the triennial assessment, we need to complete 4 different worksheets: the WellSAT 3.0, WellSAT-I, worksheet 3, and worksheet 4. And then we need to share these results with the public, and bada bing, bada boom.
Yay! Yep. So that's the triennial assessment. And then I would like to just, you know, one last reminder. So the triennial assessment is one piece of all of the school wellness requirements. So remember, we also have those 8 federal requirements that go along with your wellness policy itself. Making sure that you also host a wellness committee meeting just at least once a year. So, you know, check, have a wellness committee, you know, check, have the committee meet at least once a year. And then, like you said, Emma, making sure that triennial assessment happens once every 3 years. And a note on that, like some of you might have already completed one a few years ago and you're already on round 2 of the triennial assessment. That wouldn't be uncommon. So just know maybe where you're at with that assessment, if you're due for another one this year, maybe. And then the last piece, once again, just making sure the public is well aware of what's going on with school wellness in your district, and knowing that they can be involved in the process, and that they have a good idea of what's all going on with your school and school wellness.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Camille. So that's all the questions I had for you today. And before I pass it back to Mike, I just want to remind everyone that we will be having a Q&A after this session. So please pop your questions into the chat. And next week, we'll be talking about the USDA's newly released final rule on school meal nutrition standards. So keep that on your calendars. Okay, back to you, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma. And thanks, Camille. We really appreciate y'all today. So before we get into our Q&A session and how to access the follow-up resources from the call, I do want to talk a little bit about our LunchAssist Pro services. Your LunchAssist Pro membership offers you access to on-demand staff trainings, curated resources, a professional standards tracking tool. We also have add-on features like access to our Spanish videos, AR Bootcamp, which is great. And then as well, one-on-one consulting services to our California districts with our team of school nutrition experts, again, most of whom are former auditors. So ways to purchase, LunchAssist is an allowable purchase under your KIT funds. In fact, we've had several districts recently reach out to us about purchasing multi-year contracts. That's something that we do offer as well. You can utilize your KIT funds or you can utilize your regular cafeteria funds. Remember that your 2021 funds will be expiring in June, so we urge you to get on that as quickly as possible. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me. You can email me at mike@lunchassist.org. The recording access, we will send a follow-up email tomorrow with links to all of the recordings. Or I should say from the recording from today that you'll be able to click on. It's also on our YouTube channel as well. Just like Emma said, remember next week, Thursday, May 2nd, 2 p.m., we're going to be focusing on the USDA Child Nutrition Standards Final Rule. And our leader will be back. Jen will be back as our guest for that call. So thanks again for joining us. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up and jump into our Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Emma to